All right.
How you doing, Jim?
I'm doing okay. Thank you. Doing okay. Hanging in there.
I forgot all about it today. It was so nice outside.
I know. That's what I realized is that being that it's such a nice day,
Yeah,
it would be difficult for people to
well, I can't miss all of them, so I had to come in.
well, good. I'm glad you did.
Me
Hello,
too.
Phyllis.
Hi,
All
Phyllis.
right, so give me a second. I need to get. All right.
It's been a long time since,
I
it's
know.
really cool that you're having.
It's so nice.
Yeah,
It's great to be able to do them in this hybrid way. It
And the
gives,
snack bars are coming person
it's
too.
really, really cool, yeah. Oh, wow.
whoops.
Here we are.
See if we can figure this out here. Hey. Oh, that's a good idea.
I wanted to make sure.
Yeah. I signed up for chat and stuff. I signed up for twice already.
Oh, that's good.
I like doing this in person.
All right, great. So we're gonna try this now. Okay. Oh boy. All right. All right, good. So we can see everybody but Phyllis. So
Yeah, let's see.
Well, that's okay. I don't mind being invisible.
you don't mind being invisible, okay?
Oh, I'd like to see her.
You'd like to see her, okay? Well, if I lean back, you can see her. So
That's fine. Hi.
there we go. All right, good deal. So we'll get started here. Let me see if I can tell you. It's always such a mystery how this situation works.
I had a pen and I don't have a pen.
You don't got a pen?
No, I took one in and I lost it. If you give it to me, I hope I don't lose it.
I did not.
Oh, this is a nice pen. I better not lose it.
Right. Better not lose my pen. Right.
Have you got
Your
another
pen is on
one?
the floor right there.
That's it. That's my pen. I'd never find it. Of course, I can't pick it up.
Oh, Rabbi Jim, I have a question.
Thank you.
Sure.
That's nice.
Are you going to make a YouTube of this today also?
Yep. This one is on YouTube as well. Yep.
Can you send me the link?
Absolutely.
Because
Absolutely.
I've got friends of mine who are really interested in this, and I sent them the link to two of them, friends of mine,
Okay.
who were really interested.
Great. Oh, this is a bummer. I see that
Oh,
I see that I'm gonna have a problem here. Okay. Nothing like a problem. I love problems.
Oh.
I love
I
problems.
don't want problems.
All I
You
do
got plenty.
you are absolutely right, Sandy. You can say that again. All right. All right. So here we go. So unfortunately, the article that I was using last week to help us with Alter's commentary is now not available because I'm not a subscriber. Last week it allowed me to have it, and this week, well, not so much. So we will have to. Oh, that's what I need to do. That we will need to figure this out. I will just have to read for you. I'm just going to have to read for you I'm going to have to read that for you.
what is it? Oh, chapter
I can't
42.
read that, Rabbi.
I'm gonna make it bigger.
Chapter 42.
How's that, Phyllis?
Maybe
Why don't you
here.
Phyllis, why don't you come over here and sit there?
Okay.
It'll be easier for you to see.
Thank you.
Now, could you see it this way?
I'm not in your way, am I?
No,
Okay. Yes, I can see it now. Thank you.
It's better than sitting with there sometimes.
The thing is, I don't know what happened to our other people, the people on the call. I can't seem to find them. So hold on.
That was a nice screensaver.
Yes, that is my that's the that is the
Beautiful. It's
that
in
is the
Brighton.
Where is it? Brighton?
it's in Brighton. It's near my house.
Oh, it is beautiful.
Okay, so I'm not really sure what happened. So everyone who's on anyone who is on the call, please know that I cannot see you. So you're going to have to, if you want to say something,
Scream.
you're going to have to raise your hand electronically, or you're going to have to just start talking, one or the other. All right. So we will start where we started last week, where we ended last week, rather.
Right, that's a difference.
Yeah, so I don't think we should repeat ourselves as much as it is fun to do so. All right,
Sometimes it's not fun, it's just people.
it's just the way I do things, right?
No, it's just life.
All right, so just to sort of catch people up where we are, last week we did talk about God's response to Job, right? And we talked about how there is sort of a school of thought that thinks that God is basically just bullying Job, right? And there's the other sort of notion that God is giving Job sort of a perspective, right? That is difficult for humans, right? Which is the sort of notion that the world is far larger, right? Far bigger than any individual person, right? And he does this starting right with creation, right? You're asking Job, were you around during creation? Do you have a sense of how joyful this creation was, right? And then it's about the weather, right? The sort of intensity of the weather, right? And the beauty, and there's so much beauty in the world, right? And how that is very difficult for Job to sort of fathom a notion, right? That that there might even be beauty, right, in the terror and the violence of human life, right? And so the next step, right, is the animals, right? So we'll read through that, and I have Alter's translation with me. I won't be able to put it on the screen, but I will be able to read it to you. But let's read this translation for now, and then we will turn to Alter's translation. All right. So, wilt thou hunt the prey for the lioness, or satisfy the appetite of the young lions, when they couch in their dens and abide in the covert to lie in wait? Who provideth for the raven his prey, when his young ones cry unto God and wander for lack of food? Right? Humans can't do that, right? It's beyond human ken, right, to provide what wild animals need. We know this, right, from our own experience, right? The degree to which wild animals often can't survive in captivity, even if we seem to be able to provide them everything they need, right? The Job poet obviously doesn't necessarily know about zoos, right? But we kind of know about this a little bit. Right. All right, so let's move on to the next. All right. Knowest thou the time when the wild goats of the rock bring forth? Or canst thou mark when the hinds do calve? Canst thou number the months that they fulfill? Or knowest thou the time when they bring forth? They bow themselves, they bring forth their young, they cast out their fruit. Their young ones wax strong, they grow up in the open fields, they go forth and return not. Who hath sent out the wild ass free? Or who hath loosed the bands of the wild ass? Whose house have I made the wilderness, and the salt his land, his dwelling place? He scorneth the tumult of the city, neither heareth he the shoutings of the driver. The range of the mountains is his to pasture, and he searcheth after every green thing. Will the wild ox be willing to serve thee, or will he abide by thy crib? Canst thou bind the wild ox with his band in the furrow, or will he harrow the valleys after thee? Wilt thou trust him because his strength is great, or wilt thou leave thy labor to him? Wilt thou rely on him that he will bring home thy seed and gather the corn of thy threshing floor? The wing of the ostrich beateth joyously, but are her pinions and feathers the kindly storks? For she leaveth her eggs on the earth and warmeth them in dust, and forgetteth that the foot may crush them, or that the wild beast may trample them. She is hardened against her young ones as if they were not hers. Though her labor be in vain, she is without fear. Because God hath deprived her of wisdom, neither hath he imparted to her understanding. When the time cometh, she raiseth her wings on high, and scorneth the horse and his rider. Hast thou given the horse his strength? Hast thou clothed his neck with fierceness? Hast thou made him to leap as a locust? The glory of his snorting is terrible. He paweth in the valley and rejoiceth in his strength. He goeth out to meet the clash of arms. He mocketh at fear and is not affrighted, neither turneth he back from the sword. The quiver rattleth upon him, the glittering spear and the javelin. He swallows the ground with storm and rage, neither believes he that it is the voice of the horn. As oft as he heareth the horn, he says, Ha ha! And he smelleth the battle far off, the thunder of the captains and the shouting. Doth the hawk soar by thy wisdom, and stretch her wings toward the south? Doth the vulture mount up at thy command, and make her nest on high? She dwells and abides on the rock, upon the crag of the rock and the stronghold. From thence she spies out the prey. Her eyes behold it afar off. Her young ones also suck up blood, and where the slain are, there is she. All right, so we'll stop there, pause there for a moment. Any reactions, thoughts about this particular chapter?
I'd like to know what it's really saying.
Yeah, it's a little bit a little bit opaque. Any ideas about what he's really saying?
What he's really saying is, who are you, you insignificant little thing compared to my magnificent self?
Well, actually, that's interesting, right? God actually doesn't necessarily talk about God's self so much, right? I mean, I don't think you're wrong.
Well, who does he imply has created all of these wonders?
Right, but I think it's a little bit more than that, right? I mean, you're certainly not wrong. You're certainly not wrong that. Sorry, wrong way. You're certainly not wrong that God is saying, right? You can't fathom all of this, right? But I think that that it's that as we discussed last time, right? The imagery, right, is about this remarkable profusion of life, right? That everything here is about the fact that creation, the world, is full, just absolutely full of is absolutely full of creatures, of their prey, of their young ones, right, of their birth, right, and of the sustenance for this, right? And so I think it's not. I don't think it's simply, I'm great and you are not. And actually, I'm not even sure that is what God is saying.
I think that's exactly what God is saying.
Thank you, Sandy.
Yeah, I mean, again, like certainly I mean, obviously people read it that way, and that's completely fine. If that's a helpful reading, I don't think that that's a particularly, for me at least, that reading leaves me sort of in a mode of, oh, the Bible is basically just sort of acknowledging God's disdain for God's creation, right? And that I think that there's lots that is not very nice, shall we say, in the Bible, but I'm not sure that the Bible is going there.
I think the Bible, I think
Hold on one second, Hedwig. Yeah, go ahead.
how it sounds like the God said the animals should be live on the in the woods and everything, and the animals should take care of their own animals.
Oh, okay. Yeah, but could be right. Yeah.
That's what it sounds
Yes,
like
that's
to
what
me.
it sounds like to you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Sandy or Naomi? Connie wanted to say something. Go ahead, Connie.
I think God is also describing creatures in this world that human beings might not be 100% aware of their beauty, of their creation. We look at some of these animals and we think that they're pretty ugly, as a matter of fact.
Right.
And everything has a specific meaning and created for a specific purpose.
Yeah. Go ahead, Naomi.
All right, let's have some context here. Job has just been through incredible suffering at God's hands.
Right.
And when he is saying that he wishes he had never been born, all God can say is, look at these great wonders around you, without mentioning this little problem that he has created for Job, like the loss of everything he has, the loss of his children, the plagues that have come upon him physically. Come on, wait a minute here.
Yeah.
I'm
Right.
sure Job would care about the horse and the hawk and everything else. But how does this speak to what Job has been through?
Yeah. Right. And I think that's a very, very important point. Right.
And you can be perfectly free to tell me I'm wrong if you think I'm wrong.
No, I don't think you're necessarily wrong. That's why I'm saying but I do think, right, that the fact that God is not an effective chaplain is very clear, right? But I do think that not being an effective chaplain and having nothing but disdain for God's creations are two different things, right?
What do you mean by the chaplain?
Meaning that God never says, Job, you really have it tough, right? Never says to him, boy, you really suffered and you suffered unjustly, and that's not okay, right? God never cops to what God did, right? Now remember, we've got a little bit of a textual problem here, right? Is that when we read this book, right, we have at the tail end and at the very beginning, we have this frame story, right? We have a frame story, and it's very difficult, right, for us not to have that frame story in mind, right? So the question, of course, would be, but that frame story is very schematic, right? And what we have in the main body of the book, right, is this sublime poetry, right? These two things are very much a different literary levels. Go ahead, Phyllis.
So if I were to look for a justification in all that God is answering Job, I would say, well, what he's suggesting, and he doesn't make the connection really, is you can't imagine all the things I have to run, and you just can't imagine it. But what Job seems to be asking for is why God did it. And instead of God saying, I have all these other things to worry about, he could simply have answered him why.
Right. Well, I mean, but
That's
right.
missing.
And I think that's one of that right. And I think that's one of the wisest things about the poet who wrote this book, right? Is that the poet seems to acknowledge that there is nothing God can say as to why, right? The why, right, is always going to be, right, a function of the human impulse towards narrative, right, and explanation and meaning, right? And so, because when we do have whys in the Bible, right, very often those whys they feel unfair, right? So a good example, right, would be the one that comes up again and again, right, is why doesn't Moses get to the promised land? It's so unfair, right? And we turn that story, right, into kind of the frame story of Job, right? A kind of a folk tale, right, where we want some sort of closure, right? We want some sort of explanation. We want some sort of moral, right, of why it didn't happen. And I have colleagues who will say, this is the actual reason why Moses doesn't make it to it's not that he struck the rock, it's that he did this or he did that. There's various theories. But the reality for me, right, is that Moses is all of us, right? We never make it to the promised land, right? And I think that's one of the reasons why we feel that loss so strongly for Moses, because we recognize, right, that we ourselves are in that situation. And so I think in this case, right, the Job of the frame story, right, versus the Job in the actual poetry sections, right, are different. But in a sense, right, the God in this on one hand, God is addressing Job, right? And just the fact that God is present to Job, right, is a remarkable acknowledgement, right, of God's caring for Job, right? You don't show up and have and sort of give this monumental poem, and you speak to a mortal, right, unless you have great regard, right? God's presence, right, is not something that is direct presence is not something that's given to every character in the Bible, right? It is given to Job, right? So that is just on its face, right, is something that makes, and Job seems to acknowledge as much, right? And we'll see in a moment, right, that Job does seem to acknowledge as much. I also think, right, that God is basically trying, right, to broaden the subject. It's not necessarily to change the subject, but to make the subject not so much about Job and his troubles, right, but about the larger worlds that Job inhabits, right? And go ahead, David.
Yeah, well, it's interesting about all these things that he says about animals, wild animals, and what their world is like. And Robert Alter says in a footnote at the end of this chapter, he talks about how completely unsentimental God's vision of nature is. And that's what he says about this. And that to me is kind of strange, because again, I, I don't understand why God is acting in this way, why he's talking that way about nature, except that he seems to be saying life is tough out in the wild. Is that what he's saying? Or do I have it wrong?
No, but David, I just didn't hear what you said. That life is what in the wild?
Tough, tough.
Yes, and I think that's right. So I think that's the next step, right? Which is that God is unsentimental about nature, right? Because nature is unsentimental about nature, right? I meant to look it up, and I actually pulled up my phone to look it up earlier today, and then something distracted me. So, and now I've forgotten until just now. But there's a poet who talks about nature as being red in tooth and claw, right? Which is to say, right, that we, especially those of us with pets, right, very often like to anthropomorphize our animals, right? And we imagine sort of the beauty of living in the wild, right? But living in the wild is tough. It's really tough. And there was just actually an article about Utah, but what's the monument, the natural monument in Utah that the Trump administration made smaller, and that's caused great problems because of the number of visitors now that can go there. But one of the images in this article, right, was that there was just one of the things the tourists were looking at were the bright bloody paw prints of a mountain lion that had killed an animal, and in dragging it off to his lair, right, had left a trail of really bloody footprints, right? And I was struck by the sort of, on one hand, right, the violence and awfulness of nature, right, but also the sort of remarkable beauty, right, of nature, even in that violence, right? And I think that's what the God in the mind of the poet is getting at, right? That there is this sort of intensity, right, of the intensity of life involves death, right? And it's not trying to say, I don't think, right, that individual lives don't matter, right? But I also think that it's trying to say, it's from the grand perspective, right? We can't necessarily get sentimental about it. And I'm not sure that that's an appropriate point of view, or or if it doesn't, or if people find it disturbing, right? But I do think that life is something that involves death, right? And that's why I think it ends up, right, the last lines, right, of this chapter, right, are about the eagle, and then the buzzard, or what is it, actually, it's interesting. I think that hold on, excuse me one second here.
Can I share something?
And
small?
27, verse 27, interesting. Alter translates it as eagle, and this translation is vulture. But anyway, in any case, right, death is, for a vulture, right, death is the source of life, right? And eagles, of course, are quite violent raptors. Yeah, go ahead, Nina.
It's just a small thing. I was just thinking, sometime a while back, there was like a philosophy class, and somebody was talking about all the suffering they went through, and somebody in the class said, oh, you've been through enough, you're not going to go through more. And somebody else said, well, you can never know. You can't know. You can't tell or judge how much somebody's been through or what they're going to go through. And you can't say that it's not going to end, because we don't know. And
Right.
Just God is the one that.
Right.
really-
Yeah, no, and I do think though that this sort of not necessarily so subtle message about this, right, is that yes, it's true, right, that we really can't judge another person's suffering, right? We can only affirm it, right? And that is, in a sense, kind of what God fails to do here. That's why I said, Sandy, that he might not be a very good chaplain, right? Because he doesn't acknowledge the suffering that Job has experienced, right? He only seems to say, you don't get anything. You don't understand it. But I do think that what is potentially helpful about God's uh, response, right, is the degree to which, right, that he's offering a reframing, right? He's saying you can see your suffering only as death and a desire for death, right? Or you can see it, right, in this sort of larger perspective, that where death and life, right, suffering and joy are kind of in some sort of cosmic balance, right? And some people get the brunt of it, and other people seem not to get any suffering at all. Although I'm a little doubtful that that's actually the case, but people say that all the time. But
That
these things.
doesn't make it true.
What doesn't? What?
Some people don't get suffering. Everybody gets suffering.
That's what I'm saying, Sandy. I agree with you. I think that everyone encounters suffering in their lives, but somehow there's this. I think that one of the things that makes life very difficult for people very often, and I'm not putting this on Job because I think for Job things are clearly very terrible, right? Is that we sometimes think that we suffer in this sort of singular way, right? That our lives are somehow truly and significantly worse than other people's lives, right? And I think one of the things, yeah, go ahead, Nathan.
But who ultimately is the creator of life and death and suffering? It's almost like God is describing all of this, and I at least am attributing to God a claim of responsibility for all of this. So, yeah, fine. There is life and death in the world. There is suffering in the world. There is beauty in the world. But God seems to be taking credit for all of it, including Job.
Well,
Anyone want to respond to Naomi?
I think God is responsible for all of it. But he knows what he's doing, even though we don't know what he's doing.
Right. Okay. So Natalie is bringing up one sort of classic response, right? Which is God is responsible, and it's beyond our ken, right? One of the things that I read in this emphasis on nature, right, is that in a certain sense, yes, God is responsible for all of this, right? But it's quite possible, right, that one of the things that God has included in the universe, right, is freedom, right? And so that God doesn't actually take responsibility to the degree to which, like, which vulture will live and which vulture will die, right? And that that there is that these struggles are not necessarily going to be something that God is going to be making. God is not necessarily micromanaging the world, right?
Well, he was certainly micromanaging Job.
Well, that's what's interesting, right? Is that, see, this is where I would say, right, that yes, in the frame story, there's no question that God is micromanaging Job. But what I would want to argue, right, is that the frame story is just the frame story, right? And if we allow ourselves to be sort of hung up on the fact that see, part of what I think God's message is here, right, is that everybody suffers. Everyone has this, Job, right? Maybe, in the frame story, you've got it worse than everybody else, but everybody at some point, and I think one of the reasons that the book of Job is so resonant, right, again, is that there are moments when we really do feel this way, right? We feel as though whatever suffering we're experiencing at this moment, right, is too much to bear, right? We've all been there, right? I hazard, right? I hazard to suggest that we've all been there. I've been there, right? And ultimately, right, the question of why doesn't get us very far. Right? Yeah, go ahead, Connie.
When we talk about good and evil, we mustn't forget the fact that also that man was created with choice.
Right.
Man has that's the important factor also. That man has the ability to make choices.
Right. I think that's crucial, right? Because I think that first of all, it makes it clear, right, that in the universe as Jews tend to understand it, right? Not all Jews obviously don't want to be too you don't want to make too much of a generalization, right? But as Jews understand it, right, that notion of freedom is really important, right? That people make up their own minds about what they're going to do, and also crucially, that we make up our minds about how we are going to react to the things that happen to us. Right? We might not have a choice about what we can do, or we didn't have a choice. Am I going to get cancer or not? Am I going to fall ill in this particular way or not? Am I going to lose a loved one, before their time? Right? We don't often have choices about that, but we do have a choice about how we're going to respond to those things.
But
right?
what was Job's real choice in all this matter? I know you keep saying it was in the frame story, but in the other part, in the bulk of the poetry, what is Job's response? What is he actually saying? I mean, that is the most important part of the whole thing.
Yes, absolutely. I mean,
I'm trying to figure out, how was he wrong, or how was talking about choice? What choices does he have here? What do we see as his choices here?
No, and I think you're right. I think that he doesn't have a lot of choice, right? He obviously has no way out of his dilemma, right? Of the terrible suffering that he's experiencing. He doesn't have a choice to suffer or not to suffer, right? That's not a choice. But what he seems to be saying, right, is, I want to die. I wish I had never been born. I would actually, and in a certain sense, not to, I said this last week, I don't want to trivialize this, but I do think that, sometimes, cultural, hold on a second. Sometimes popular culture bumps up against these things, right? And I mentioned last week, right, that the big villain of the latest superhero movie, says, I want to go back down to, he's lost, right? He's been defeated, but he says, I need to regroup, and I need to go back down to Earth, because on Earth there is anti-life. And that's what I need, anti-life. And I want to find anti-life, right? And I have a feeling, right, that what Job is experiencing, right, is his suffering has gotten him to a point where he wants to get that anti-life, right? He sort of envisions an existence, right, that is a negation of all existence, if that makes sense.
But I'm trying to understand what the poet had in mind when he created all this. I still don't see that very clearly.
You don't see it, or you do?
No, I don't. I don't see it very clearly. In the terms that we've explored it so far, I wonder if there isn't another way of looking at it.
I'm sure there are multiples, yes.
Yeah, because Job is the hero. Job is the hero of this. And anybody who reads it has to relate to Job in a strong way because it is so overwhelming.
Right.
And to see how his so-called friends just do everything completely in a negative way towards him.
Right. Right. Yeah, right. I mean, I was saying before, right, that God might not be such a great chaplain, right? I can tell you for sure that Job's friends are actually terrible chaplains, right? Anybody that goes up to their friend and says, well, oh, I'm sorry you're suffering, but you must have done something terribly wrong in order to deserve such suffering, right, is no kind of friend at all, right? And in the frame story, they actually at the end they actually get their comeuppance, they have to, but I think that I mean, again, I may be, obviously I may be wrong, but I want to start from a perspective, right, that God's address, and this is the poet, right? I'm talking about the poet's intention, or the way the text works, right? Is that God's address to Job is not simply, right, I'm better than you, so shut up, right? Which it is to a certain extent, right? That is what that is how Job takes it, and I think that's really, at least at first, and I think that's what is really interesting, right? Is that I think you're right, David, right? The reader is clearly cast into the role of Job, right? As the mortal who is suffering, right? And we go to God and we say, why, right? And we don't get the answer we want, right? So I do think at a certain extent, right, the book is withholding the satisfaction, right, that we would maybe derive if at least we understood why, right? Because understanding why, we just never will.
Maybe Joe will go back to the times and go back to the early times to see what went wrong.
Yeah, right. I mean, he wants to know, right? He wants to, why did this happen? Why does this always happen to me? Right.
So that's why he will go back to the earliest time and see what went wrong so he could change it.
Maybe, right. Maybe. Yeah, go ahead, Naomi.
The other question he could be asking is, how do I make it stop?
Yeah.
Never mind why. I'm here now, I'm suffering. How do I cause it to stop?
Right. How do I make it stop? Exactly.
Well, Carl Jung has written a book called Answer to Job, and he looks at all this in a totally different way.
Yeah, so what does he say?
It's almost as if he's saying that God is the bad part of things, and he looks at Job as the hero, as someone who's essentially wronged by God, and that I've only read like the very beginning of it, so I'm not really the right person to summarize it well, but there is a completely different way of looking at it according to him.
Right. No, and there's also the sort of very the sort of pious Jewish way of looking at it, right? That Job is in the wrong. He just doesn't understand right, the largeness of God's vision. And even though his friends are more wrong, right? Job has to acknowledge that that the suffering is just it's not God's, it's not something that he can understand. It's above his ability to understand. Go ahead, Natalie.
Just thinking,
I can't. Oh,
1 second, Natalie's going to say something, and then we'll come back to you.
I was just thinking maybe God wants us to have so much faith and so much trust and so much love for God that no matter what we're going through, that we trust that that's all what part of his plan, whether we like it or not.
Yeah.
And that we have to just really have the faith that.
Right.
That
Right. And that kind of a faith, right, doesn't come easily for many Jews, right? Whereas I mean, I remember when I was I may have mentioned this last week, and if I did, I apologize to those of you who were here last week, but after White Church, the massacre at the mosque in White Church, I had the opportunity to go to the mosque in Roxbury as part of an interfaith service. And the imam was talking, right, about how, according to his understanding of Islam, right, God does have a plan, right? Nothing is by accident, right? God has a plan. And so the kind of faith you're talking about, right, is the kind of faith that the imam was talking about, right? And I myself don't find that kind of an answer a comforting answer, but I understand that many people do, and it's important to remember that. So, and that is definitely one way to read this book, right? That God knows what God is doing, right? And if you just wait, right, and have patience and have faith, things will work out, right? And they do for Job, right? He lives a long life and is content, right? So he gets the reward. Go ahead, Naomi.
This is irreverent and possibly irrelevant, but I kept being reminded of Tevye in Fiddler on the Roof. Would oil some vast eternal plan if I were a wealthy man?
Yes, right. And you're not wrong. You just got it backwards, right? Is that Tevye, right, is a comic riff on Job, right? The ever-suffering, Eastern European Jew, right? And one of the things actually that Tevye, I have to say, Tevye does pretty well, is this kind of reframing, right? He says, "Oi, life is awful. It's terrible. Oi, okay, well, what? Well, how we got to live with it. So we're gonna live, right? L'chaim, and so, so obviously in a much less intense kind of way, right? I mean, Tevye is mostly for comedy, right? But there is real loss in the Tevye stories, right? Even in the musical, right? There's real loss. Yeah.
Well, Rabbi Harold Kushner has a totally different take on this, because he says that God can't be all good and all powerful at the same time.
Right.
And he says that God has to be all good. He cannot be all powerful. And that's clearly not what the message is here, but it's an interesting take.
Yeah.
And it's one that I like a lot, because in the world that we live in, we don't have control over much of anything in so many ways.
Whoa.
When
Naomi, are you okay?
Yeah, I just dropped something.
Oh, okay. I was worried that you had dropped yourself.
No, the thing that props my camera up fell down.
Oh, okay. Whew. I mean, it really looked like you just took a tumble there.
Yes.
So I'm sorry, David. Yeah. Yeah, Kushner, Kushner is actually a really interesting popularizer of this notion, right? Which again, many religious people really have a hard time with Kushner's idea, which is not to say that Kushner's not religious. He's a religious guy, but just obviously people's ideas about religion are very different. But yes, this notion, right, that omnipotence can't go along with beneficence is a tough one, right? And this, but I do think, right, that to a certain degree, this chapter about nature, right, is getting at that, right? What kind of a just God would allow the suffering of all these wild animals that serve as prey for the animals that are bigger, stronger, more vicious than they are, right? One of the questions that the Job story elicits in me, right, is there really that much of a difference between humans and animals, right? And right, and the in the Jewish tradition at least is constantly sort of thinking about this. What is the, it's a constant question, right? What is it? We have a certain idea, right, that animals are slightly different than we are, right? But when you try to pin that down, right, it's a little slippery. You know,
We were talking about choice before, and that's something that I think I can't really speak about what Jewish belief is on this, but I think you said yourself that choice is a big important thing.
right.
And so that's something that is very different from the animals, is that
Right.
humans, according to the Bible, according to the scripture, humans have choice. I mean, I think it comes out of the Bible. I think it's in there. I think that's something that we can conclude from the Bible, is that humans have choice, whereas
Well, humans have
other
choice to a
creatures don't.
certain, right. Humans have choice to a certain extent, right, to a certain degree, right? Yeah, go ahead, Connie.
But when we say that, when we go to shul and we say who will live and who will die, and that's sort of beyond our ken, but we are given advice about how to act
Right.
for tzedakah and tshuva and good deed, etc. And so there's where we make our choice also.
Right. Absolutely. Right. There is a sort of a recognition in that part of the liturgy, right, that we really don't know what the coming year has in store for us, right? But we do know, we are pretty much assured of the fact that bad stuff will happen, right? Or maybe what's worse, right? Good stuff will happen to other people, right? That won't happen to us, right? And and what should our response to that be? Right? How should we respond to the inevitable suffering in our lives, right? And right, and so that particular part of the liturgy says, yeah, as you said, right, we should work for justice, right? We should pray, right? And we should try to make a return, right? We should atone. We should try to become, and the way I always understand that, right, is we should become one with ourselves, right? We should try to figure out what, how are we going to be really true to ourselves?
Better people.
Yeah, how do we be better people even amid the ultimate suffering, right? And the Job poet, right, is offering a slightly different perspective, right? He's basically saying you have to take all of your suffering, right? You have to take in the context of something larger than you, right? In the context of you have to sort of understand suffering and death in the context of the
Could
large.
you please give it here or in the kitchen? Okay.
No, we're not allowed.
Okay. The larger.
Put it on this counter.
That's fine.
You have to. Sorry. Oh, yeah. You have to take everything in this sort of larger context of life and death and suffering, right? Because it is how the world is, right? And yeah, go ahead, Natalie.
Oh, no,
Oh,
I was
yeah.
rubbing my eye, I'm sorry.
Right. And and that to sort of take to be it one of the best ways to make suffering stop, right? At least in my experience. Now I can't speak about this in terms of like the kind of suffering that Job has had, with this sort of constant running sores and the the physical agony. But in moments, right, when I am most when I am in sort of when I feel myself to be suffering, one of the things that really helps me is to get out of myself and towards other people. And that's this has been a very difficult year, right? With COVID, with a lot of other things happening in my life, right? One of the biggest blessings for me is that I have my job, right? Much of which involves being with other people and helping other people. And that is such a balm for suffering, right? So that's how this speaks to me. But obviously it's not going to speak the same way to everybody. It's very, very challenging. And I do think it's very tempting, right, to cast God as the villain. But for me, and just speaking personally, I don't find that to be that helpful. Both because it gives, because I am a little bit more with David. I don't feel that God has that much control over stuff. That there's an element of randomness in the universe. That obviously other religious traditions don't believe that. But go ahead with any other final responses, and I thought we would be done today, but we're not. Next week we have even better creatures than this week. Yeah. So So next week's creatures are the behemoth, right? The behemoth, which is either a hippopotamus or a big wild ox, depending on what tradition you're paying attention to, and Leviathan, right, which is either a crocodile, a mythical crocodile, or sometimes people see it as a whale, right? So, and these creatures, right, show up, right, in the behemoth shows up in The Master and Margarita, which is a Russian novel from the early 20th century. He shows up as a cat who walks around Moscow with a pistol, and so clearly a kind of demonic figure. And Leviathan, is the whale, right? In Moby Dick, and so I think just in Naomi mentioned Tevye, right? So these creatures have an afterlife, so it's actually interesting to look at them in their original context. So that's what we'll do next week. So I'm open to any final thoughts about Job and nature, God and the creatures. And we didn't even talk about the ostrich. What's going on with the ostrich? Who doesn't get any wisdom and so leaves his eggs or her eggs out to get smushed. I mean, it's like the most amazing.
It makes no sense.
It's the most amazingly obscure piece of this poem. I sometimes wonder. It's like the difference between animals and people maybe is that people actually can put things in perspective, right? And animals can't even. Some animals can't even keep their eggs protected. And if God is actually claiming responsibility, right, for making the ostrich that dumb, right? What kind of a claim is that, right? So it's more than a little confusing. Let's just put it that way.
Okay.
I have a feeling, Sandy, if you're saying something, we can't hear you. Are you saying something to us? If you are, please unmute yourself.
God isn't making the claim, we are. We don't have the answers.
You're right. We don't. In general, we don't have the answers, and certainly we don't have the answers about the ostrich.
That's true.
I mean, and is that actually true about ostriches, or are they just, or is the poet, making claims that are untrue? I mean, do ostriches really leave their eggs randomly?
I don't know.
It seems impossible that there would be any ostriches. If there were an ostrich that left its eggs unprotected, there would be no more ostriches, right?
But turtles leave their eggs in the sand, and most of the young turtles don't make it back to the sea.
That's right. So
That's
maybe
true.
that's right. So maybe ostriches have a similar.
I think there are lots of animals.
Right.
And what about all the fish that lay their eggs? And
Right.
I mean, this happens all the
Right.
time.
It's true. I mean, and I, you do get sort of a sense, right, of that life is both an unbelievable miracle and also just completely
Roll of the dice.
not only a roll of the dice. It's just an everyday occurrence, right? It's interesting about the experience of being a parent, right? On one hand, like, you have this miracle of having had children. On the other hand, right, lots and lots and lots of people have a child, right? It's just not that big of a deal. But it takes, like, I don't know, it took me like 10 years to realize, oh, I have kids like a lot of other people have kids. Why are all these people who have new children so annoying about their children? Are they the only ones who have ever had a kid? And then of course I remembered myself, well, wait, I was that guy 10 years ago.
Wow.
So I don't know, maybe there's something to that. Like, what, you think you're so
it's kind of
special?
ordinary, yes.
Right. I mean, it's extraordinary and just completely quotidian, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So anyway. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. See you soon.
Bye.